Oh my, well, here we are. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my very intimate little webcam session, everyone. Yes, it sounds a lot more provocative than perhaps it is. But here we are, together, at last, alone together, in my living room. Look at this, where we are. Not ideal, but I had to move at the last minute. All right. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Wiggle, wiggle, woggle. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for your patience here. I apologize for the delay in starting the stream. My internet was not cooperating, as they say. Not cooperating. But now I'm here to cooperate with you. We're going to talk today about our Dungeons and Dragons game that we want run every Wednesday. Hey, it's Tuesday. We plan our D&D game. Wednesday, we run our D&D game. And on Thursday, we come back, maybe not to this chair, maybe not to the way that this life is. Let me turn the camera, or turn myself a little bit. So I'm a little bit better lit. All right. Well, I feel like I'm holding court here, everyone. Well, welcome. So fancy. Yes. So, thank you for joining me. Thanks for your patience. I apologize once more for the impromptu nature here, but Dom had some things going on in the studio, and I did not expect my internet to take a crap on me. So, where are we at? I'm your Dungeon Master. I am your host. I'm Tom Lommel. I run a D&D 5e game every Wednesday here on Saving Throw Show. It's called the Iron Keep Chronicles, and we have 3 sessions left. 3 sessions left, which seems like a lot, but is in fact not a lot, because we really have to... Today's topic is all about sort of building to an epic campaign finale, and if you don't start planning that in like 4 or 5 sessions away from the end, you can get in some real trouble trying to squeeze things into the last one. And as we saw last week, the players are going to follow their own fun and take things in a direction that they want to go. And that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to chase your plot. What they're going to do is do what seems fun and interesting at the time. And last week, what was fun and interesting was teasing one of their fellow party members and then putting him literally in mortal danger. So that's the that's what happened. That means we sort of have to carefully maneuver if we really want to get to our big campaign finale, as scheduled on the 18th of April. Right? That's what we're looking at. That's where we're aiming to wrap everything up on the 18th of April. So that's where we're at. We're 3 sessions out, and it's time to really kind of put the screws to building that momentum to the. So here's the other part of your consideration when I say, let's build this thing to an epic climactic finale, right? I don't think that we can squeeze a finale into a single episode, right? I think we need to kind of have a series of escalating incidents that kind of like pop off, probably in a final confrontation with the Beholder Xanathar and whatever forces he's arrayed around him, right? That's probably the final encounter, but I don't consider that to be the finale. We have a number of elements that we have in play that we need to start crossing off of our list, for lack of a better term. We need to start resolving in a way that the players find either provocative, oh, that's not going the way I think it's going, that didn't happen the way I think it's going, or satisfying, oh, okay, well, finally we freed freed Avril's mom from a terrible curse where she's lost her leg or whatever, right? So, as Wraith42 that points out, there's some other questions about, what's going on. There's other implications about what's going on in the campaign world that we need to address. So there's a number of different elements, but I think it's your job as a DM, if you're trying to really shape the drama and suspense of the story in a way that's interesting and actually dramatic, as opposed to letting the game kind of like creep and flow towards some sort of natural conclusion, you need to start making some considerations. And I think that here we are 3 sessions out. I started to make those considerations really like last session was like a big one. Even you've seen it like the week before, right? Like let's feed them more information and try and get them to form a plan. And the truth of the matter is, this is not a planning type of party, right? This is a party that just sort of follows their instincts and isn't great about like, let's take a moment and discuss what we know and what we want to do. So let's talk about our 2 main techniques that we need to do to build towards a finale. And I think the 2 things that you need to consider are things that sort of work in tandem, right? And one is applying pressure. So giving them a reason to move faster, to move with some urgency. And then secondly, information is the stepping stone to a plan of action. So giving them the information so that they can form a plan of action. Now, arguably, there's the fundamental building blocks of a finale are this sense of urgency, this pressure, pressure builds, and then the protagonists attempt to execute a plan or improvise, a certain course of action, which then kind of maybe is resolved to their satisfaction or is resolved in a far more interesting way, but ultimately, in alignment with their goals, right? The rebels destroy the Death Star. They didn't necessarily figure out exactly what, didn't think ahead of time. The original plan was Princess Leia takes the plans, hands them off to the rebels, and they analyze it and go do their own thing. They didn't expect to have this whole side quest of, you're meeting this, right? So there's an unexpected journey. There's a series of revelations that happen, but ultimately, like Princess Leia's goal at the top of the movie is fulfilled by the end of the movie, right? So, having a plan is important, but how the party arrives at that plan in an RPG is dramatically different than maybe you would see in other types of fiction, right? And I guess what I mean by that is it's best if you can have your party form a plan that they want to execute, rather than kind of tell them what the plan is that they should execute. And those are 2 fundamentally different approaches, right? One is very heavy-handed, and the other, it's easy as a DM to kind of second guess what they come up with, but I think it's important for them to feel like they have a good handle on the challenges that they face, and they have some good tools for addressing those challenges, and then let them go for it, knowing that they're not going to be it's not going to be 100% match, right? Like that's disappointing when you say, oh, okay, well, what we need to do is take the magic key to the giant fortress and unlock the back door and sneak through, and if all of that worked, if their plan were to work 100%, players are a little bit disappointed if it goes exactly according to plan, I think. There are times when you have to hand them that win, but I think there are every role player is looking for an outcome that surprises them, right? An outcome that goes a little bit beyond what their expectations were. That's how you inject an interest and excitement in your game, is that the players have an idea what may be coming next, but it's either more engaging or cooler than what they actually pictured, right? So, yeah, maybe I should hook up the satisfaction of the players to an EKG or a heart monitor. Yeah, I don't know. Wraith 42 is making some good points in the chat. Yes, so at any rate, so my two main points today are we're going to talk about some ways that we can apply pressure to our particular party, and then we're also going to talk about this whole idea that information is the stepping stone to a plan of action. So in other words, we give them enough information that they can hopefully synthesize it and form a plan of action, and we don't have to sort of lead them by the nose and be more heavy-handed about, if this is what you want to do, this is the way to do it, right? I think it's a dangerous proposition, even in a limited time scope, to tell your players, well, this is the way to do something. Oftentimes, when you introduce that sort of thing as a DM, it comes across to the players as, well, the DM hasn't planned for us to go that way, so we're going to screw things up if we decide to go the way that we think is cool and interesting. Oftentimes, for me, it's not so much of, I didn't plan for you to go that way, as you're either getting in over your head or getting way off on a sidetrack that you don't know about. And I'm trying to help lead you along the storyline that you're currently pursuing. But, in a true sandbox fashion, you should be able to either abandon one storyline and let them follow another, or adjust the puzzle pieces that you have on the back end so that it turns out that this stuff in this storyline over here actually latches on to this weird direction that they've decided to go. So there we go. What will they do? It's such a great question. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, what exactly they're going to do. All right, so let's talk about some different ways that we can apply pressure to the party. Now, I think that we have to be careful about not introducing too many new elements that they know about or that they don't know about at this point, right? What we don't want to do is introduce a bunch of new pressures that they go, well, now we have to try and deal with this. They've been handed a series of kind of time pressure challenges. We've been setting a series of clocks, whether it's, Sebastian, the AI is dangerous, or the first there was the curse that the mom contracted. Then we found out that the dad got dissected to the point where his life is in danger. There's a number of different things that they're already coping with, right? And we're going to talk kind of through those things. But introducing something outside that sphere now feels like you're piling on. Like they haven't solved really anything yet. And then you add another one into the mix. And I think we have the possibility of overwhelming them and analysis paralysis setting in. And they're like, I don't know what we can do to solve any of this stuff. And I don't know which one, I don't know how we prioritize. Especially with this party that is not a planning party. I think you have to be careful of just throwing so many things at them that they just sort of throw up their hands and go, I don't know, right? Yeah, will everything explode? That's certainly, that's certainly, so here's what I will say about that. I don't think, it's not my intention to blow everything up. But let's be honest, the idea that they're on a starship that has, it's been described as having 8, giant nuclear reactors or whatever. If they're on a ship that has that much power, the idea of blowing up the ship does have a certain amount of appeal. I don't know that the idea of sacrificing the ship and sacrificing themselves 100% is appealing. But I do think, like, Grayson wants to make a noble sacrifice, right? Like, that's one of his main character objectives. He wants to make a noble sacrifice. Staying on board the ship and blowing it up may be a way to do that. I don't know. So I think, I guess my point on that is, don't take stuff off the table because it sounds goofy and ridiculous, right? Like, I think that's the sort of thing that actually falls right in line with this party's motivation and play style. Is let's do something over the top. Personally, I always feel like when you're building toward the end of an adventure arc or a campaign arc or what have you, that is the time to introduce elements that strip away the conventional rules, right? That is the time to give them like a nuclear weapon that they can use or not use, and suspend some of the conventional kind of situations that you might find yourselves in, right? So you don't want to have as your campaign finale the players, the party fights an archmage in an abandoned chapel, right? And that there's nothing else interesting about that. You want the party to fight an archmage in a chapel made out of glass steel that's floating on the astral plane where gravity isn't working and magic is heightened, and there is an army of spiritual devas or angelic forces that are marching on the plains of Tartarus, and if you don't kill this mage to break the gate open, they're all going to be destroyed and crushed, right? Like one of the elements to having an epic campaign finale is to make it epic, and that means suspending rules in a way that the players understand. That means heightening locations and creating these, phantasmic is certainly can be a word, right? Like a fantastic locale that grabs their interest, and they say the rules don't work here. They work differently here. So when we talk about blowing up the ship, like I think of like what would that be a cool scene? Would the players be interested in that? What would be fun about blowing up the ship? That sort of thing, right? And in fact, that's the first thing on my list of ways to apply pressure is that the ship is going to blow itself up. We've already talked about the reactors have been operating at peak capacity for longer than they were designed for, etc. Right? The idea that the ship is on the tipping point, now that's the difference, right? The ship's on the tipping point. If the players take some sort of action that pushes the ship over the tipping point, well, now it's not the DM like heavy-handedly like, oh, well, you guys screwed it up. Now the ship's going to blow up, right? Now they know, okay, well, if we do this, there might be a consequence to it. Oh, the consequence might be the ship is going to go into overload. The engines might be destroyed. What if there's an opportunity for them to intentionally send that engines into overload, right? That's something to think about. But that's a way to apply pressure. And it doesn't mean that when they do whatever they're going to do, bam, it goes instantly, right? Like let's look at Aliens, right? A great example of we got to find out what happened to the colonists. Oh, and then it turns out that the reactor's been damaged. It's going to overload. And just when they've gotten the last survivors and they're going to evacuate, she goes, I'm going back in. Well, it's only going to be safe for 20 minutes, right? Perfect. I somewhat disagree with the pacing of Aliens because I do think when they have that sort of weird fourth act of battling in the cargo bay, it's almost a little too much. I feel like they could have had a nice third act landing, but far be it from me. They've certainly made their money off of that one, right? But yeah, there's a ton of potential unintended consequences or intended consequences, right? So, but let's break down kind of the elements that we want to. But I certainly think that the ship and the engine are an opportunity to give a plausible reason why players find themselves in this heightened situation where something weird and bizarre and fantastic is happening, right? Why the rules don't apply right now. It helps if there's some sort of inciting incident or precipitating event which excuses why you find yourselves on, well, we had to go to this gate to the astral plane in order to find the silver sword that led us to the Githyanki mage, who is the guardian of the da-da-da-da-da, right? So they understand, we had to go there. we chose to go there, whatever, right? So if they understand that this situation is going to have repercussions and consequences, then it gives us an excuse to build into the fiction why the rules don't work. And those are opportunities that you need to look for, right? What could they do which would set up a reason for something even weirder and more bizarre to happen? What is something that they could trip off which would heighten the circumstances and recontextualize, reframe things in a different way? I mean, the party may blow up the ship in the second. So Thomas W. Young says, prediction: the party accidentally blows up the ship in the second to the last episode. I think the finale probably spans 2 episodes, right? When we talk about a series of building episodes, of building incidents, I don't know that, if there was a blowing up the ship incident, if that happens in the finale. Is that the way to... If we take as a given that fighting Xanathar is going to be our be-all, end-all, right? And if we take as a given that we're going to need to dedicate some time to denouement, right? We need to give the players some time to deal with the repercussions of everything that's come before and the conclusion of this adventure. We need to give Thawne a moment with his father or whatever. We need to give Avril a moment with her parents or whatever that outcome is going to look like. We need to give the characters room to breathe and have their denouement, right? Then we've got to have kind of like a roller coaster, like 2 sessions. We've only got 3 hours, and it's hard to pack too much into just 3 hours when you say to yourself, I want a good 45 minutes to an hour for these characters to like have their scene and breathe, right? Because I always feel like I sort of shortchange them a little bit. And I personally feel like in this particular circumstance, I owe them a little time to play this stuff out. Yeah, as Delrock points out, like whatever happens to the ship needs to be a stepping stone to the end game for the confrontation with Xanathar, right? Simath Pirnikov, welcome aboard. You have not missed anything besides the tech issues. And I did actually reveal some mysteries of Cthulhu, but yes. So what are some other ways that we can apply pressure that we've introduced already in the game? Like I said, without introducing new elements, some other things that we can do to make them feel a sense of urgency, right? Potentially the curse, right? The silver fog that comes down and eats flesh, the flesh-eating nanite curse, whatever it is, that has already claimed part of Abigail Birdsong's leg, and apparently is directed by Sebastian, right? And I think those 2 things kind of go hand in hand, but I want to tackle them individually. And one is the curse. Now, apparently, the Doppelganger Brotherhood, the Ghost Children, have some sort of way of treating that, right? It hasn't been established whether they have a catch-all, like, solution or antidote for it. Doesn't seem like it. It seems like their catch-all solution is we seal ourselves away until it sort of burns itself out, right? And so it is literally sort of like a plague or a disease. So we could apply it as a pressure, a form of pressure. We could escalate the sense of urgency using the curse. I suspect, I don't know, I just don't feel like the players are really hooked into it. I don't think it's a compelling element for them. And I don't think there's a lot to do. It can't be manipulated, right, to really much of an advantage. When we talk about, okay, the players do something and there's a consequence, like the reactor's on a tipping point and they interact with it and it does something, That's interesting, right? And that gives the players a compelling choice. Do we want to screw at this thing to gain X, Y, or Z benefit, knowing that it may have A, B, or C type of consequence attached to it? The silver fog, whatever it is, the curse from heaven, doesn't seem to have. It doesn't seem to offer many advantages. It doesn't seem to offer that. The benefit we would get, there's no benefit. It's just we need to defeat it. We need to avoid it. And so in that respect, I feel like it's not so much necessarily a great way to build urgency. It's maybe a little bit more of an obstacle that needs to be overcome, right? In which case, maybe you put on your suit and then you have to be decontaminated before you can go in, take the suit off, or maybe you need to spend an X number of hours inside your suit. Yeah, it's awful. The doppelgangers could tell them, like, we have to spend literally like 3 weeks inside of our suit before these things largely go inert, and they've cleansed the earth deck of all of its organic life. So I see it as more of an obstacle than it is necessarily a tool, although it could be a tool that does inject a little bit of urgency, or I see it more of a complication, unless there's something in the earth deck you're trying to save. Something to consider, right? I do like Thomas W. Young's idea here that they could reprogram it or redeploy it against Xanathar and his forces or whatever. Maybe they could capture or bottle some of it. I really like that idea that they could weaponize it, weaponize a weapon, but that they could somehow capitalize on it. I like that idea. I'm going to consider that, as we kind of go forward in the next week or two, whether that's an opportunity worth pursuing. Wraith 42 says that potentially there's a conflict escalation between the ship factions where the Vegapygmies react to something and spark a war, and the doppelgangers are screwed, so they decide to escalate a war against the other factions to take their space. I think that's interesting, but I worry about the fact that I don't think the players particularly care about any of the factions. I think it's been convenient for them to meet the doppelgangers, and they have met the doppelgangers, right? I don't think they have a strong attachment to the doppelgangers, and the doppelgangers are the most sympathetic party out of anyone on the ship, right? They don't like the Tekapygmies. They don't really care about the, hoopy-froopy Vegapygmies. So getting the three of them and those factions involved in some sort of conflict, I don't think they would. I think they would go, well, then we'll back the doppelgangers and wipe out the Vegapygmies, and that's fine. I don't think it provides a compelling or difficult choice for them, right? So, as Wraith 42 points out, that brings us back around to Sebastian, right? So we talked about the curse, the nano plague. Could they potentially weaponize it? I like that. Or custom tailor it to a particular type of life. I think they're going to, I think they're going to be hesitant to use that thing for fear of introducing it into the world at large, into the Sword Coast, and it just running wild and just destroying stuff. Having a plague agent like that, it does provide an interesting moral choice for one character in the party, right? Like for Grayson, it's an interesting choice of should we release, Anthrax into the world of Faerun, even if it's Anthrax that's tailored to root out beholders. And I think you would spend literally 45 seconds thinking about it and then go, no, it's not worth it. But that's interesting, right? I do think Wraith 42's idea here of Sebastian finding out about the outside world could be a huge deal, right? And Sebastian deciding, oh, okay, well, guess what? I'm not just up against this Earth deck, this chance for organic life to reestablish itself. There's this whole planet that has organic life that I could conquer. That's an interesting and compelling thing, right? They have only had sort of a shirt tail attachment to Sebastian, and they've been told like, "Oh, you did this. That's not good. That was you've kind of let you uncorked the bottle and the demon came out. That's not good for you." I liked following that theme. Like that is definitely having there be repercussions to the info stream and Sebastian having more information and more power is, I think, a strong, compelling factor for them to take action, whatever that action might be. It might be to try to eradicate Sebastian. It might be to try and escape the ship and blow it up before he can get his forces to Earth. Or it might, to Pharaoh. Or it might be some sort of three-way showdown where it's like Xanathar versus Sebastian's robots versus the party, you know. So I think that's a compelling idea where we run the risk of introducing another arch-villain, so to speak, right? And I think Xanathar is lurking in the background there, and you want to be careful about not overshadowing him. But I do think Sebastian has some ripe potential. In order for him to really fulfill this kind of like big boss or secondary lieutenant kind of boss role that we're talking about here, we need the players to have a little more insight into his motivation, who he is, how he might operate, what he might do, why does he want to do this, goals and methodology are things that I think they need a little bit of backstory that illuminate his goals and methodology, right? Um, so I do like this idea that Sebastian starts digitizing cities or something like that, right? Yeah. And as Delrock points out, whatever decision they make here has to be memorable. I think that's true regardless of our particular campaign. Like that's what we're really trying to do is create the most memorable event in a series of memorable events. Now, have we always been successful at creating memorable events? No, not necessarily. It's our goal, but we don't always fulfill that. Sometimes the players fulfill it on their own. Like last session, the memorable event was, kicking Grayson into the water and then having this huge fight against a sea monster. That was a memorable event. It was not something I planned. I didn't say, "Oh, now I'm gonna get him with this." It was something I knew could happen, but I didn't try to engineer a memorable event. And an opportunity for a memorable event happened, and I took advantage of it. Right. But that's our goal with building towards a finale. Is we create a series of escalating events so that finally this final climactic encounter, the players can, and the DM too, can look back on it months or years later and go, "Oh yeah, remember that time?" With da da da. Like that's really like the heart of what we're looking for, and that's why I always try and give my advice on this show around what's the story function that's at play, and not so much about what's the best rules mechanics that are at play, right? Occasionally your players will remember the ones and the 20s if they happen at particularly opportune moments, right? But your players are not going to remember that they rolled a 17 when they struck the killing blow on the fire giant who was the king of the city of Brass or whatever it was, right? You just want them to remember that they fought one-on-one in the arena in the city of Brass and slew, Schnurrbart, the king of the fire giants. You can't try and engineer rules mechanics around great story moments. You can try to create rules mechanics. Am I going to contradict myself here? I'm not sure. The rules, you can't depend on the rules to generate a great story moment, but you can manipulate the rules in order to encourage a great story element, a story moment. That's what I'm that's what I'm thinking. They can still put things into the prison. So yes, I don't know. I don't know. That's an X factor of, could they load people into the prison and get them out that way? Part of the consideration there, and I don't remember if the players know this or not, but part of the consideration, and it's been demonstrated before in the campaign, I suspect they probably have forgotten this, but the idea is, the prison is full. It's gotten filled up because the warden has been sort of in absentia, right? And so the prison is full, and that means if you want to put something in, you have to set something free. And they have not been too keen to do that. There's basically like one free slot that they could put Thon's father in because the sister was in Amy's character. Her sister was in the book, so there was one free slot that they could use up for that. I don't know. It'd be interesting. I think he probably has plans for that thing, either pulling his father out or whatever, or putting somebody in or whatever. It's possible. It would be a way to save, Tobias Birdsong, and put him in the prison with probably a couple other doppelgangers or whatever. I don't know. That's something that I as a DM have to keep in mind, but it's something that I can't count upon as a story element, right? Just reading through some of it. There's a lot of different story elements here. Yeah, they did pull out the paladin, right? Yeah, and that's I think but what happened there was the paladin came out, and I think somebody else had to go in, and maybe that's how they got Thon's dad in there, is they pulled the paladin out. It's a long time ago chronologically, not necessarily in the story world, but chronologically, it's a long time from where we are now back to where they were dealing with the Book of Thorns. So, we'll see where that plays. Like I said, it's something that I have to maybe make some decisions about in case it comes up. I don't feel like it's an element where I can go, oh, let's bake something really clever into the story with this. Create an opportunity for surprise. Don't require an opportunity to bake in a twist. So yeah, there's been some discussion in the chat of Xanathar and what Xanathar can do, and I think he's our final element for applying pressure, right? And there's a couple different ways. They know Xanathar's after them. They know that Xanathar has seen them because he's contacted, Avril when she read the book. Given the time dilation, has Xanathar managed to somehow penetrate through to the ship? Like, what if Xanathar boards the ship? What if the climactic battle is on the ship with Xanathar? I mean, I've always pictured it as more being like, okay, we're back in the Sword Coast or whatever. We're back on the edge of Anarok, the blasted desert. But maybe that's not where it takes place, right? Maybe Xanathar has finally been able to marshal enough forces, given the limited information that he knows. It's taken him X number of years to do it, but he's finally decided, I'm going to brute force this, and he's marshaled enough forces to actually penetrate into the ship, and he's going to take over the ship. To me, that's also, a fascinating set of circumstances, right? That's a fascinating conflict. It also sort of goes back to what was suggested earlier, is like, what if you set up a war between the factions? And so we talked about, like, okay, what if we pit Sebastian against Xanathar? Well, what if that battle doesn't take place back, in the Great Peak Mountains, but that battle takes place within the ship someplace? That could be interesting. So there's a lot of potential there, right? Like the advantage that we have with the time dilation is that it gives the rest of the world, and especially Xanathar, a lot of swing in terms of changing the circumstances that they left and giving them a plausible excuse for arriving at or interjecting themselves into the scene just at the moment. Just so happens. Yeah, well, it just so happens that you were gone for 10 years and they finally got on board the ship. It took them forever. 10 years. Oh, shit. Emperor Riptide says, would Xanathar's anti-magic eye affect the whole time dilation technology thing? I don't think so. It's not me. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities there if Xanathar makes an appearance aboard the ship. It really short circuits in a good way. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but it short circuits a lot of how do we get this wrapped up and these people to this place, and then these people get introduced, and then this thing, it starts to it really focuses the conflict inside the setting that the location that we've created, as opposed to a series of moving from A to B to C, right? What do I do to celebrate the end of a campaign chain? I don't know. I think we're going to take a couple weeks off is the answer. The entire time I'll be thinking about, like, what are we going to run next? What's the next step in this journey? It's a good question. All right, so those are the elements that we can use to apply pressure, right? The more that they align, then I think the more that the solutions can align. If Sebastian and Xanathar are both on board the ship someplace or in the same room, you have the potential to, as I think Wraith 42 said maybe, of killing two birds with one stone, right? You can knock out Sebastian and Xanathar and have it be part of one climactic encounter. Okay, pretty cool. But getting those things to align without creating new branches is the tough part, right? Because I think where the party will fall down and trying to form a plan is like, well, what about this? Either they're going to ignore it, or they're going to get bogged down and like, I don't know, what do we even do about that? I guess we'll do something about it sometime, but I don't have any good answers. That sort of brings us to our next topic, right? And we started a little late, so I'll go a little bit over. But information is the stepping stone to a plan of action. So I think it's important for the players to have a solid sense of just what they want to do to pursue a goal, right? If let's say, for example, their goal is to get off the ship. That's a great goal, but if you don't know how you're going to go about it, it provides for a poor play experience. Well, we leave the ship. Okay, are you going to retrace your steps through the various mazes and corridors which you have kind of like wandered down and encountered all these different people through. Like, how do you want to do that? When you ask that question, then they're like, oh, well, I didn't think about that, right? We want them to think about that, right? Um, and the key is information here, right? To give them as much information about what's going on as possible. We've talked about this before. We're basically, it's time to fish or cut bait. It's time to sell out our secrets. I often use the metaphor that an adventure arc is like crossing a river, and you just start putting stones in the river that are plot hooks. And as the players start walking across them, you ignore the ones that they don't step on, and you start following the path that they pick out through your adventure, right? As we get toward the other side of the bank, we want them to land on the other side of the river, right? We can't have stones in the water that are still sunken, or we can't have too many of them, right? We need them to be able to go, oh, okay, well, if we do this and this and this, that gets us to our goal. And so there's a couple different ways of helping them form a plan, right? But I firmly believe that information is the key to them revealing or discovering how they want to pursue the end game of the campaign, right? And you have to hold some things back because you don't want them to have a complete understanding of the situation. That's boring. You want to surprise them to some degree, right? But you need to just like give away. You need to stop holding your secrets so precious, right? Um, so let's talk about some different ways that we can feed them more information about what's going on, right? So some common avenues for you to reveal information in an RPG would be an NPC is a terrific one because there's a dynamic kind of there's dynamic interplay there, right? They say something, but they ask questions and the NPC can answer, but the NPC can also volunteer things or ask them follow-up questions about things that they think they know, but they've misinterpreted or whatever. The NPC can reveal things, volunteer things, respond to questions, and also clarify their understanding of something that's happening, right? So an NPC is absolutely an invaluable tool, and it's only limited in scope by what that NPC could plausibly know, right? So obviously, if you wanted to know a bunch of stuff about the ship, and you ask one of the veggie pygmies, they're going to give you this weird answer about like, oh, well, there's heaven and there's earth and there's the three hells, and that's sort of weird, abstract, not particularly useful answer that the veggie pygmies have given them. But if you talk to the doppelgangers, like so, the doppelgangers have a much more granular understanding of what the ship is about, and they tell them, oh, okay, well, we're traveling through space, and the engines, and here's where the engines are, and they call this heaven, but it's actually, whatever the command deck, and they call this Earth, and it's actually bioengineering and terraforming, and so because the doppelgangers, the ghost children, are more informed, they can plausibly reveal more information, right? I mean, what if they talk to one of the engineers who's down in hell? What would that person know? What if they could revive one of the AIs in the ship, or the info stream reconnects one of the AIs in the ship? That NPC potentially has a much broader scope of knowledge. One of the reasons they wanted to reconnect the info stream is so that Angelica could step in and help them in their key quest. Well, maybe Angelica still has an opportunity to step in and share information. So an NPC is a terrific tool for revealing what's going on and having an interactive discourse to massage and further the understanding of what the situation is, right? And it's only a matter of like how much omniscience, how much knowledge do you imbue that NPC with, and is it plausible that they would have that much knowledge? And you see this all the time in regular D&D games, right? Where it's like, oh, there's the oracle by the side of the road, or even just like the paladin has a vision, or the cleric prays and their god answers them. I interject this into my game all the time. I don't know if it's a crutch that I use. I mean, you can consider it that, but it is a convenient way of foreshadowing, in some respect, or backfilling information, addressing an information deficit in a way that it is engaging and heightens the fantasy of the world, right? So that's one thing, right? We might another common way that information is revealed to a party. This part of the talk is a little more generic. It's not quite so specific to my game, right? Um, but a very common thing is if you can't interview an NPC, you have a journal entry or a letter or some sort of correspondence, something that that character has written, a poem or whatever that illustrates a scene from history or something that has happened between that NPC and somebody else, right? um, so a journal or handout is also a classic way of revealing more information. What does that look like in this particular scenario? I think, it's stuff like the roster of the crew provides some information, right? Um, I think there are other, if there were engineering, an inventory of supplies that are on the ship could tell them something. Um, there's also not that much of a difference between a diary account of something that happened and doing a flashback to, you know, what happened. Just basically kind of like wiping the fiction and going, okay, we go into this flashback. Whether you involve the players in that flashback or not, right, is a different story. But having that sort of that is certainly available to us in a technological setting of like having like a video log or a captain's log or security cam footage or something like that, right? So we can actually like kind of inject little flashbacks into our narrative in a way that is a little more plausible than in the fantasy world. Although sometimes you'll see people be like, "Oh, you pick up a memory stone." It's fine, but yeah. Um, yeah, and having this sort of stuff is a way that you could show consequences of like, this nano plague or whatever. Um, so that's those fall into, to me, those fall into less interactive and limited in scope, sort of like the handout territory, right? Of I'm trying to convey several specific bits of information, but I want it to be limited. I want it to have a box around it. I don't want a high amount of interactivity. I want it to present three specific pieces of information that they should take away from it, and then we kind of like get out. Like that's the end of the handout. That's it. There's a couple complicating factors with this approach, right? Which is the party may misinterpret something that they see in the flashback or that they read in the journal. They may draw the wrong conclusion from it, and you have no way to reshape it. Secondly, you might accidentally overwhelm them with information. I find I often overwrite these handouts, and I like to add little bits of flavor and do some world building and set the scene and fill in some character development. And the next thing you know, I've read like this whole page of information, and they get one of the three things, or they get one thing and then they misinterpret one other thing, and they draw like two other conclusions from it that are not actually that important in there, right? So that's the tricky part about having a static handout that they kind of either hear or read, but that can't dynamically respond to them, can't clarify, can't give more information. Sometimes as the DM, you can kind of step in and go, no, 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 that's not exactly what you saw in the memory crystal, or you happen to know that this is a common trade term for a goblin camp. You know, you don't think it's undead. You think it's a goblin camp or whatever. Sometimes you can find ways within the game system to, or within the, kind of within the meta aspect of play, to do some clarifying. But you got to be careful how much you use that for, right? Yeah, like the ship roster in Thawne. Like there's that's supposed to lead you to think about like, okay, well, did all the gods come from the ship? And we've gotten to that point, but I don't think, in my mind, there's more of a backstory to it than that, than just the simple A to B. Like, oh, the gods are people from the ship. Well, I think we all could have kind of gotten there pretty, without even necessarily that handout, right? That's sort of setting the stage for more. Okay, what's the more? But yes, that's the thing. And then the final, I think, I don't know if it's the final, but the last thing that I want to talk about that I think is a useful way of providing the party information is to provide them with a map, right? And this is a classic, like, okay, here's the village of Greenwater, and over here is the cave of Tharbald the Fierce, a notorious barbarian chieftain who lived many hundreds of years ago and buried his treasure in a cave and supposedly guarded it by the pillars of fire and the ring of 12 wraiths and the stone which could not be lifted, right? You put those things on a map and they go, oh, guys, let's go. Let's leave Greenwater and go to the stone that could not be lifted, go down the shaft of fiery lightning, confront the 12 wraiths, defeat the pillar, pass through the pillars of fire, and get the treasure. It's very limited in the amount of information that it actually conveys. Like, it doesn't tell us a lot about what those threats are. It gives us some information, right? But it does give them a route to follow. And potentially, if your map is more sophisticated than just A, B, C, D, E, you go, oh, well, we could either go through the pillars of fire or down the shaft of fiery lightning. And if you make it branching and then it comes around, or there's a back way in or whatever, now all of a sudden they've got choices. And that's, the players don't necessarily care about I think most players understand that it's a very rare game where all options are on the table and you could go anywhere and do anything, and it's all going to be equally cool and interesting and exciting. Players will sign up for a railroad job just like people will get on a roller coaster. They know when they step on that line that they're going to come out over there 45 seconds later. What they care about is that what happens between here and there and the loop-de-loops that happen, that's what matters. As long as the journey is entertaining, they're willing to step aboard it. Now, if you were to stand at this thing and say, well, I don't know, but I think rather than doing the upside-down loop-de-loop, I want to do the thing where the cart goes out from underneath you and you go over the water. Oh, okay. If it branches, as long as they're given choices, then they feel like they're a little bit more in control of their destiny, right? So a good map will give them enough information that they can understand what the threats and risks are, but also enough information that they can make an informed choice about which of those risks they want to attack and ameliorate, right? So, that's that's that. Yeah, there's a lot of different things that we could do with Sebastian. I think that could be fairly interesting, right? um, so this is not technically canon, right? This is me updating Expedition to the Barrier Peaks and putting my own spin on where the gods came from and all that sort of stuff because I think it's an intriguing idea. That's not canonical Forgotten Realms. I literally do not care. Like that's not important to me. So anyway, that's the that I think that's the last major piece of the puzzle in terms, and it kind of goes from most dynamic format providing the most information down to literally like the least and minimal medium for delivering information. A map. It's some lines, it's some X's, it's some badly drawn trees, and it's some words that are scrawled on there that nobody really thinks are particularly reliable, right? It says Forest of Doom. What the F does that mean? I don't know, but it's the Forest of Doom. We probably don't want to camp there. So, um, that's the spectrum. I'm not saying that a map is worse than an NPC. I'm just saying it's an array of tools that you have available to deploy when your players are facing an information deficit. And I think we'll probably see all of these things sort of come together in the next session so that the players can kind of drink in as much information as they possibly can and then execute a plan in some way, shape, or form. That is my main goal for the next session is to make them aware that time is short in character, right? Give them character motivation to act with urgency. The players know we have 3 sessions left. But their characters need a reason to justify why they're acting as if there's only 3 sections left. So give them that sense of imbue that sense of urgency within the story. And then secondly, give them enough information that they can pick a path to follow to try and attack their problem, right? And their problems being multiple. Saving Avril's parents being the main one. Something about Basharla? Is that really a problem? I don't know. It's a motivator for Ava. But more importantly, than dealing with getting off the ship and dealing with Xanathar. And ultimately, that is attached to harnessing or exploiting the god's fire in some way, right? So that's what we're looking for. That's what I'm looking for when I'm looking to prep this next session. That's my main goal for tomorrow night, is get them in a place where they understand why there's urgency and they have enough information that they can come up with a plan to overcome their obstacles, achieve their goals in the time frame sort of given. So those I think are our 2 main things that we need to consider when we're building towards a finale here, right? How do we apply that pressure? How do we give the players a sense of motivation that their characters want to act quickly and decisively in a heroic fashion? And secondly, how do we give them enough information about the obstacles that are ahead given the shortened time frame that allows them to formulate the roots of a plan, or at least the framework of a plan, which then, of course, is going to have to somewhat change or encounter obstacles that they didn't anticipate, and then push through to the other side. So that's that's our chat for today. I don't have anything else particularly exciting on the docket, and kind of got a little frazzled here by having to move into the other room, so I apologize for the fireside chat, as it were, and the poor lighting especially. But thank you so much for joining me. I think on Thursday, one thing that I want to talk about, which I think you all love, kind of like spinning off like the ideas and possibilities, sort of DMing with me here, right? And so I want you to start thinking about. We're not going to have a long discussion about it on Thursday because I doubt I'll have made up my mind. But I want you to start thinking about what would you like to see next from the Iron Keep Chronicles. If we go on hiatus for 2 or 3 weeks and then come back, is there a particular adventure that you would like to explore? Is there a particular play style, in terms of sandbox versus mystery versus, is there a particular adventure style? So either is there a specific adventure, is there a particular adventure style that you would like to see? Or, what to you would be an interesting, like, next chapter of the Iron Keep Chronicles? And keep in mind, like, I don't know whether at the end of this arc we continue on with this party and take them, I talked about this last week, take them on to kind of like the 8th through 12th level kind of band of power, or we start over and start a new party and do kind of like a whole new chapter, right? So there's a lot of different options available. I'm curious to hear what you all think, as sort of dedicated fans of the show. I think that's something that we'll talk about on Thursday. I don't really want to get into that today at all. But that's something to consider. All right, Blaine's here. Thank you so much for the bits today. Really appreciate it. That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. Tonight is the League of Adventure at 8 o'clock. Please tune in for that. I can't remember, Dom, is that the finale of that, or is it the second episode? If we do, bang calendar. Ooh, bang calendar. There it is. I don't know if it says. Last night was our penultimate episode of Mysterium. I hope you tuned in for that, because next Monday is the last, as the capper episode of that. Tomorrow night is the Iron Keep Chronicles. Thursday at 2, I'll be back with DisOrganized Play. And Friday night is Wildcards. Obviously, Saturday at 5 is Tempting Fate. So those things are all groovy, groovy, cool. I think Friday night is the finale of Wildcards. Am I wrong about that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so tonight is the final episode of League of Adventure, and Friday night, I believe, is the finale of Wildcard. So we got a lot of exciting stuff sort of coming to a head this week. It's a big week. It is a big week here on the Save and Throw Show. So thank you so much to Fawquad and all of our other mods who help keep the channel safe, friendly, clean, and accessible. Thank you to everyone who had a suggestion today. Obviously, every time I say it, I can't, overstate it enough, that every time I talk through these things with you, I always get an idea of like a different and better way that things could go. And we had some really great suggestions thrown out today. And I just sort of like I enjoy having all of the different inspiration sort of chumming around in the chat. If you want to continue the chat, you can go over to our Discord channel and post in Disorganized Play there or whatever. And there it is, Discord. Thank you, Flockwad. So there's that. You can follow me at Dungeon Bastard if you are so inclined. That's where all my role-playing stuff goes. That's all I've got. Yeah, well, until next time, let's dungeon! Oh, yes! 1023 for 1024 on the nose. Once again, thank you so much. Putting Dom Zook and his pitiful clicking abilities to shame, I am and continue to be your master champion, your dungeon master, Tom Lommel. How do I turn the sound off? Dropping frames!